Hi, welcome back to another edition of the Subseasonal Forecast Contest. This is Dave Margolin, and it is June 22nd, so we're looking out into July 7th through July 11th. All right, and I think we're gonna do sort of an abbreviated discussion today, so this should be about a half an hour or so. Um, in terms of our format, let's see, I'm joined here by Michael. Mike, any other than doing our uh, attribution and then kind of get into the forecast, any other topics that come to mind that you want to cover?
Um, I think it might be interesting to look at cloud cover. For not like overall over the. I don't know if we have that data for the past like forecast verification or not, but just overall cloud cover for today or whatever, just to kind of get a gauge of are we looking at like true heat, or are we looking at you know uh inflated low temperatures, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, we could try to look at things like that. So are the high CDDs being influenced more by the maxes or the mins? I think is where you're going with that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So, all right, let's I guess start with the attribution then. And let's look at the most recent week of verification. I think it's June 1st. Yeah. So this is our most recent verification period. And in terms of performance, well, before I get to performance, in terms of the verification, you can see the number here on the bottom. It was 51 CDDs. And as a reference, the 10 years, 45 and a half. The 30-year is 42-ish. So you can see that this certainly was a warmer than normal forecast, even as compared to the 10-year. And in fact, um, it was warmer than or hotter or higher than any of the forecasts. You can see that here. Matt Lanza was closest at 48 and a half. And let's look at well, actually, before we look at performance, one other thing, I was looking at this offline just earlier. Now we only have five forecasts so far this schooling season, since we do it once a week, and so we have five verifications since May 1st. But I found this interesting. If you scroll back, I won't do it for the sake of time, maybe, but if you scroll back to our five forecast verifications, um, four of them, the verifications were just like this. They were at the top, above any of the forecasts. And there was one exception in there. I think that was the second week of May, and that's when the verification actually came in quite cool. I think it was near the bottom. It wasn't at the bottom, but it was near the bottom. So four of the five verifications have been above all of the human or computer forecast here, and I think that's if you aggregate that and look at the bias numbers here, I think that it's kind of consistent. You can see the overall, in fact, everyone has I guess, a cool bias, right? Because it's we're talking CDDs and the bias is negative, so that means the forecasts on average have come in higher. So some folks less of a cool bias, like Paul Roundy, and then some of the forecasts more of a stronger coal bias. The ECMWF, Matt Rogers, in particular, the CFS with a 13 bias. And I think that's interesting, because we've talked about this in years past about the CFS bias, and in the summer, the cold bias. And in fact, we can look at it real quick. Look at last year's. There it is, for the entire season, 22 forecast -9. So early, small sample size so far, but the early indication is the CFS still has a problem here with the bias. But again, I think it's just an interesting point that again, four of the five forecasts have come in. We've underestimated the CDDs, and that's factored in. You can see that the bias metric kind of shows that. So
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I'll even add in like it's the CFS is a bit surprising considering if you look at the heating season for this past winter, the CFS bias was nowhere near, what it had normally been, at least to my recollection. Yeah, I mean it's 7, but it was still I think beat the EC anyway, and then it was doing pretty solidly until I think the last couple of weeks of the season, if I recall properly. But um, still quite surprising to see it doing so poorly after having done so well in the winter. Um,
Yeah,
and
but
then
there are kind of two different things there. It definitely, I agree with you. It definitely, you can see the numbers in terms of absolute performance, and it did better than the EC. And that in itself, you're right, is surprising. But the bias actually was still, it actually had a more severe bias than the EC. You could say 7. The EC was almost effectively 0. So it was too cold, meaning too cold, too high. But overall, the overall performance, you're right, was still better than the EC.
yeah, I suppose yeah. I mean that does seem to be the case. Still though, it's almost double the bias from the winter. Granted, that's 20 or 30 forecasts. That's my mistake. 30 forecasts. So, maybe it'll head back down to its seasonal average, so to speak. Um, but as to the second point with no one actually being able to forecast over the verification, I think that's interesting. And actually a little surprising that we've been verifying so warm and no one's really been willing to uh, up their forecast a lot, which I think part of that, if I had to wager a guess, would be that we're kind of early in the season where you wouldn't expect too wild of swings of the CTTs. Um, like for instance, in this particular forecast, the 10-year normal was 34.4 and we were 7 over that. So that's not to say that we could have gone all the way up to 41, but that would be a very, very risky forecast to go 42 CDDs, given that both the 10 and 30-year normals are 34 and 30 respectively. So I think part of it, at the very least, is a little bit of a hesitation. At least I can verify on my end that it's been a little bit of a hesitation to go super high, despite all of the signals saying that you should go higher. And we've had all these verifications that have been higher. So that would, lead to some credence that maybe we should be, adding in a fudge factor if we've done in the past to kind of account for, you know, maybe a weakness in our formula or a weakness in my formula that doesn't allow us to justify going as high as 51. I mean, Matt Lanza didn't have too much trouble, but he still wasn't higher than the verification. So
Yeah, I think those are good points. I mean, I think ultimately, kind of what you come down to is there some sort of more systematic bias here that we need to account for? I think it's obviously hard to answer that question completely objectively here, but we can speculate. And yeah, I mean, just look at these again, small sample size, but not zero. The last 3 forecasts I'll start with today's, and just let's say comparing it to the EC, right, which is the benchmark model. Verification 51, EC about 41, so about a 10 CD difference. Let's go to the forecast before that. Verification 49, EC, again, almost a 10 CD difference, 39.6. Let's go to the one before that. Verification 42, and again, about
hmm.
10, 11. So for the last 3 weeks, you've had a 10 CDD gap here. Now, again, it would be really interesting to look at. There's the EC's issued twice weekly, so I don't have that forecast handy. But if that did hold up, yeah, I mean, raises the question. What should you do for this week? Well, actually, let's look at this week. If you were going to apply that, so what's 22nd? So the EC this week is whoa, well, hello. So EC is 60. So you know, if you're going to put in a plus 10 on that, that's a biggie. I think 70 would probably be get you near record territory, I'm guessing. But let's check it out. What do we say the forecast period is? July,
Let me
July
look.
7 to 11, I think.
7-Eleven, yeah. I just put a note in the meeting notes so that we remember when this forecast verification comes along to see if the EC does in fact continue its plus 10 trend. Because if it does, there might be something interesting there for the season if that holds up.
Yeah,
4 weeks isn't long, but that's essentially a whole month of plus 10 to EC, having gotten you a nearly perfect forecast.
yeah. So again, if you apply that plus 10, you're going to be in record territory, or at least since 1950, you'll be in record territory. And then let's just look one more time at the bias. I guess coldest to lowest. Yeah. So you know, even the EC, even including those two other forecasts that we didn't look at. Now, again, one was a forecast that actually verified, I think, cooler than the 30-year. And then I think the one before that was pretty hot. So anyway, you know, almost -9 EC with the you know the subset of forecasts we have, and of course CFS we talked about even higher or lower, if you will. Well, I mean, you know, I mean, yeah, there's a couple things here. I mean, clearly, you could see that the max are normal. I mean, the CDDs so far this season have been above normal, right? So above the 30-year anyway, and that's why you have this bias with the 30-year normal. It makes sense. It's just been hotter than the 30-year normal. However, you do hope that the guidance, right? You hope that your EC and CFS guidance, you know, perform better than your just normal benchmark, right? That they capture those swings and that heat and whatever. And yeah, so far, like we just commented on, at least the last few weeks, it has not done a good job on that. Now, sometimes I've heard other folks speculate, you know, when we've had like Dave Darkangelo on or some other folks that, you know, maybe you know, it doesn't capture the pattern change that well, but then it eventually eventually gets the right idea, and then it, you know, it hooks onto it. So that's something obviously you have to be careful on if you're going to play devil's advocate on all the stuff that we just talked about with the you know, hey, let's go with the plus 10. You know, we don't know, but maybe the EC is quote unquote, you know, sort of latched. No, this is the wrong forecast, but 22nd, right? Yeah. Maybe the EC is now you know, better capturing the forecast. And so, you know, you shouldn't just blow this up by plus 10. So, you know, well, as always, more questions than answers. But yeah, I agree with you. It is it's definitely interesting to see what's going on so far with the model biases. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems also, since we're a little bit on, you mentioned the patterns there, it seems we might be getting locked in, at least for the next couple of weeks, it seems, from what I've noticed, to a ridge west kind of, not so much trough east, but you could kind of argue that the trough or neutral east portion like we've got right now. It kind of looks like we might be getting locked into that, which sucks for the West Coast. But
Right.
um, if we could, if that does hold, and it might get a little washed out towards the 16 to 20. Maybe it looks like it's getting a little more progressive. It's hard to tell, but you know, if we could somehow figure out whether or not that pattern is going to stay ridge west, whatever east,
Mhm.
or if it's going to, like that composite suggested, that maybe the ridge will move to the east. I think that would be extremely, not only extremely valuable, but extremely important to being able to forecast correctly. Because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the West Coast being warm won't generate as many HDDs. Why do I keep saying HDDs? CDDs
That's
than,
right.
say, if we have a big ridge causing a heat wave from Chicago to New York. I could be
That's
wrong
definitely
about
right.
that, but I don't. I think that would cause more of an HDD jump. Again, geez, what's wrong with me today? CDD jump. Ugh.
No, that's right. That's right.
I think that would be. There's not much. It's can't do a research topic on it, but because by the time uh, you'd have to start now and probably finish today, but so that's not possible. But um, if that's the like so this kind of indicates to me that we've kind of been in that pattern with a warm west, not necessarily cool east, but cool south and mild east or northeast, I guess, which actually I think that looks like I can't remember. Is it? I think positive P&A in like March or something, I think is what that map looks like on the yeah, let me see if I can pull it up. Where is the
But
it's
I
gonna
think
take
you're
me
right. I mean, I think your just general point is right. There's more population areas in the east, which is so if the ridge, all things being equal, if the ridge remains in the west, you're going to get you should get less CDDs, population weighted CDDs.
yeah,
But it's amazing too. I think what's amazing about this and what surprises me, and I think some others, is like the fact that even with this pattern, you still have what CDDs, which for this period, starting May 1st, are what number five? Yeah, ranked number five in the last 72 years. Ranked number five, right? With a pattern like this, where you're getting I mean, you're getting negative contribution, if you will, from Texas and all these areas in the southeast, but the heat is so strong in some of these other areas that it overwhelms. And so, I remember us, having those conversations with other folks about, um, hey, well, if Texas doesn't get hot, at least that's going to put a lid on things. And I mean, I guess technically you could say it's put a little bit of a lid on things, but not by much. And especially if you change this to June 1st now, I think it's even stronger. So if you take, because we had some variability in May, right? We had we had that, cold that cold end of May, or a few days. Look at this.
yeah,
You just look at June 1st to June 20th. It's number one. Number one, not even close really. 12
yeah. Look at
CDDs.
that.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we talked about this last week with Dave D'Arcangelo, but I do think it's worth saying again, because I think one of the things you try to test in these kinds of discussions is, and I still hear these things, these rules of thumb, and sometimes rules of thumb are good, and sometimes they're not, and sometimes if you don't, especially when you don't test them, because then you start to, you just, if people say them enough, it just becomes it's like folklore. It becomes a real thing. But again, this is a case where if you, so far this summer, it looks like if you had just said, well, I'm going to really cut into the national CDDs because of some of the wetness in Texas, that would have been a no, the wrong decision, right? We're ranked number one so far this summer by, with some wiggle room here. So that wouldn't have worked out, at least so far. Oh,
Yeah,
did you send
certainly. Yeah,
something?
I sent the two links in the chat. It looks like a combination of a negative or no positive NAO in July and a positive PNA in January, which you know is just that's just where it reminded me of. But it's interesting because I don't think that's the cause, but it's just interesting that's happened to be how the pattern seems to have set up a little bit. Um,
Well, and I think that's interesting when you say go into the cause, right? Because ultimately, I think that's, yeah. I mean, it could be interesting coincidence, but I think what you're saying is really what's driving this, right?
yeah,
Um, and it's funny, I mean, that's, I guess, a whole nother conversation, but I've seen different reports, and I know sometimes they talk about the SST pattern, the PDO, negative PDO, and this, that, and the other thing, but I don't know. I think that would be, I guess, I guess I wonder when you look at these patterns, and we were just talking about how the patterns have kind of been a little bit back and forth, more of the ridge anchored in the west, but and there's been some wobbling a little bit. But is this pattern, is there a significant contribution from the SSTs in terms of the actual pattern configuration, or is it more a function just of global SSTs and hemispheric SSTs just being so warm, and just that we're seeing these in general, the warmth overwhelm the cool. Again, it's not that we didn't have any areas of cool, it's just we've had these overwhelming periods of warmth. So in other words, the climate change is a layer, is one possible layer that's just influencing things to a significant degree. And then if you can take out that layer, what, to your point, like kind of like what are those things that are driving more of the regional configurations? Like, why is the ridge a little bit more here versus, say, you know, in Texas or New Jersey or whatever? And is that the PDO? Is that some of these other things? Why is the AO setting up a certain way? In fact, let's just read what Max are saying here real quick. This is a good shift into the 1620. I skimmed it, but I'll read it out loud with you. The forecast features small changes, blah blah blah. While the South is here, this comes in a pattern characteristic of positive AO, which correlates in a manner consistent with the forecast. Drought also has a role into relationship in the aboves and the west, although it's not clear how monsoonal influences may affect the southwest. Overall, the forecast, CDDs, blah, 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 confidence is low to moderate. So in terms of pattern configuration, I guess they talk about a positive AO a little bit, and they don't really say what's driving it. And then they say maybe the drought's having an impact on the west. So I guess that's a reasonable argument too, right? That put aside the climate change, then the fact that it's wet in Texas, dry in the west, could that be at least an enhancer, suppressor type thing to trying to put a little bit more ridging here and a little bit less ridging here, kind of thing? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, far be it from me to disagree with Maxar as well. I mean, they know more than I do when it comes to this stuff. But um, yeah, I mean, I I find it odd though that they're only mentioning one specific factor. I mean, usually with these things, I mean, maybe I'm wrong here, but usually with these things, it seems to me that if you end up going with one particular thing, you can end up getting burned. So, like, I wouldn't make a forecast based solely on a positive AO at any point. Like, even if that would have given me a perfect forecast, I would never go with just a positive AO. That just seems too risky to me. But on the other hand, maybe that's, maybe I'm thinking it in the wrong way. That, I mean, obviously they put other stuff in here, but they mentioned the AO as their leading uh thing. I mean, if you put it in there just in the discussion, that to me means that was a big thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it better, do you think it's better to have more uh information, or maybe not information is maybe the wrong word, but add more stuff into your forecast, like the teleconnections, MJO, go all in and have like 6 or 7 different things? Or is it better to keep it simple and just, whatever their process was, and then, add in the AO because somebody there knows that the AO is particularly influential on the pattern?
Well, I mean, I guess to defend Maxar, of course, we have to defend them because they're our sponsor. No, I'm just kidding. No, but I don't think they're necessarily just saying the AO. I mean, I think in the forecast reasoning, they don't say it explicitly, but they do show the models down here, and so I think their forecast is again, although they don't say it explicitly here, and arguably it would be helpful, just like we try to do in our forecast contest. It would be helpful to lay out exactly what they're putting weight on. But my guess is just just based on what I see here is they're putting significant amount of weight on the EC and that kind of pattern, which is consistent with their forecast. Some weight on the CFS, which again is kind of consistent with their forecast. And then what they're saying beyond that is, and hey, when we look at teleconnections and stuff like that, well, we've got a positive AO, and that's consistent also with this kind of pattern. And they also throw in the drought, which they also, just like we looked at with the soil moisture, is also consistent. So I think that's kind of what they're saying. I don't think they're dismissing or not including the EC and CFS. So I don't think it's like just one data point. But to your other just general question about, is it better to have more or less? Matt, I think this is probably one of those things where if you ask 10 meteorologists, you're probably going to get an assortment of answers. So I would definitely encourage that. But the way I would look at it more is just, ultimately you want forecast data points with the highest performance, right? Best
Yeah.
performance. So in other words, it's not so much whether it's 1 or 10, it's how accurate are each of those, right? If you have one data point that's, in theory accurate 99% of the time, well, it's probably all you need most of the time. Now, realistically, that's not, kind of what we see. But I think ultimately, when I put my like statistics hat on, you want as many data points that have accuracy that are not highly correlated with each other, right? So you don't want redundancy, and that is something that's I think happens a lot, especially with qualitative forecasts. And I think honestly, I think you got to be very, very careful, even with what you see here. In other words, and frankly, even with dynamic guidance, right? Like the EC and CFS have probably are correlated with each other to some degree. And it's really important, I think, if you're really building a good objective metric to understand that. Is the EC and CFS 0.6? Is there a 0.6 correlation, a 0.2, a zero point 0.9? Those are important things, right? Because if it's 0.9 or 0.8, that effectively tells you that they're giving you the same information. So you want to be careful about double counting. Like to say something like, well, let's just say you had two models that had really high correlations. I'm not sure the EC and CFS have a high correlation. I'm sure they have some correlation. And, but putting that aside for a second, let's just say they had a 0.9. You don't want to do a situation, which I've seen similar things like this, where, let's say one shows a forecast of 100 CDDs and the other one's 101. Then you go to your end user or trader or decision maker, you go to him, oh man, I have high confidence today because both models are showing basically the same forecast. So, hey, you should make a big, you should go all in on this because it's high confidence. No. That's wrong, right? We know that's wrong because statistics tells us that that's just a redundant forecast. It's not adding really meaningful new information. And so you're effectively double counting, which effectively is giving you an inflated value of confidence, which is dangerous. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that actually even gave me an idea for a potential research topic. So I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that would have to go into doing this, but the idea basically is if we could do something similar to what Dr. Decker does with the CPC forecast, which is to assign a CDD or HDD value to a teleconnection or like the MJO forecast, something along those lines, where if we had like a positive 2 AO in mid-July, that would translate to like, I don't know, plus 10 or plus 15 to the 10-year, or something like that, where the MJO phase diagram here, where it gives you, or the one on the forecast contest where it gives you the actual number, something like that, where we could do that across the board, with the P&A, and it would be a big project, of course, don't get me wrong, but the value there of having numbers associated with those, where we could put those into the forecast contest and see, like, wow, the EPO has been doing phenomenally well this year. It's been pretty close. There's a good correlation there. Something along those lines where we got the number, and certain teleconnections performed really well, or they were really directionally correct, or something along those lines, where we could get data and value from that to see kind of, and maybe even partially answer some of the questions we have, is like, what's driving this pattern? And is it ENSO, etc. Well, if we had that data in front of us, and granted it would be pretty hard to get, uh, you know, I think that would give a lot of value, uh, not just to us, but to even industry, if they don't already have something similar. Um, what do you think of
Yeah,
that?
I agree. I agree. I mean, listen, that's exactly why we did something like this. And it's not, it isn't that hard. I mean, getting the data, everything you described is not, in theory, it's not that hard. I mean, it is work, right? But we already have a model for it. But put aside that, like whether someone's going to be able to do that or even wants to do it is the bigger thing, and has a little bit of time. Um, it's I absolutely agree with you that there's a lot of value. The value is because it tests some of those rules of thumb. It tests a rule of thumb that's frankly in Maxar's report right now. Right, they're talking about the AO, and there's the way they suggest it, and you have to infer. But the way they suggest it is they are using the AO as part of their weighting. It's weighted into their forecast. And what you're saying, what we're saying is, should it be, and how much should it be? And those are the best way to answer those questions, are to try to quantify it and try to exactly what you said. Nothing's perfect in this world, but you try to replicate as much as possible how people are thinking about it, right? How they're applying it subjectively. And basically, I just repeat what you said. And you could use something like this or whatever, and it's critical that it's subjective, but it's critical that it tries to replicate how people think about it, such that, like you said, -2 AO, you find a certain number of analog points, and it's always the same process each time. Though it picks a sample size of 50 of the nearest points or whatever it is, and it pulls that HDD or CDD value, and then over time we evaluate it, and then you're right, we're able to see how does it perform standalone, and we can do that with the MGO now, right? And how does it perform if incorporated into some sort of statistical weighting function? And of course, that's another little project in itself, but you can keep it pretty simple too. You can say, hey, if I every day I put 50% of my weight on the EC and 50% of my weight on my NAO analog method, how would it compare to the EC alone? But no, I think those exercises are great. To last thing I'll say, like, are groups doing it? Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there's some group who has something like it, right? But it's definitely not. It's not out there enough, right? Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be talking about it, and otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it so often, and otherwise, we wouldn't see it in the Maxar report in a very subjective way, right? Like, hey, it's kind of consistent, but it's but what is that, but how much, how unique is it? How much value should that get? Should it get 10%? Should it get 50%? Those are critical questions, right? So no, I really like it. And definitely that's something, please make a note of. And I think, yeah, anytime anyone wants to, and including myself, anytime anyone wants to take on that project, I think, I think it would be an awesome project that we can definitely try to get out there to the public.
Yeah, I wrote it down in the meeting notes. I haven't submitted the thing yet because I don't know if I can add after I hit submit. But at any rate, yeah, I agree 100% that if we can find somebody to that wants to do a research project and has the time to do it, I think it'd be great.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, to taking notes on that thing, you could just take another note. You could hit submit again.
Oh yeah, good point.
I mean, just
Yeah,
it's as long as it's on that thread on that week, we'll go back and find it. No, it's great. That's a great, great, great idea, because you never know, right? You never know, some whether it's you, whether it's me, or whether it's someone tomorrow, maybe Dr. Lupo's group or something, who says, yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, just keep it in mind, because no sense of starting from scratch here. We've got a lot of the framework in place with the MJO. If someone wants to try to do it like that, it's not exactly like that because it doesn't have phases, but it's the main trick there is the analog method. It's saying, okay, today's value is minus 1.6. Now, how do I objectively grab a subset of analogs, right? And that method, I think we've got basically we can replicate from the MGO, unless someone wants to, just do something completely different. That's also up to them. So, okay, cool. Well, that was pretty good. Is there anything else, Michael, you want to cover?
Um, I don't think so. Unless we want to touch on the current forecast for like just 2 seconds, just to get a
Yeah.
gauge.
Yeah, why don't you talk about today's 22nd? Come
Sure.
back.
Is this for 7-Eleven? Okay, yes, okay.
See here real quick. I'll just sort this for us. So Matt's the highest. Matt Rogers at 63. I guess I'm tied at 63. And CFS, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
It's going.
And
It's
another
not giving
note,
up.
real
What's
quick
that?
there. It looks like Matt Rogers is a little bit more confident in his forecast. He did go lower on the spread than he's closer to the 10-year normal for spread. So I think
Yeah.
that's an interesting tidbit. I'll also note that we've been outperforming the 10-year. I think according to the bias, it was about by 8. So if that does come to fruition again, it won't be the 70 that the EC is predicting if you go with the usual plus 10 for the EC the past 3 weeks. But once again, we'll end up seeing a forecast where nobody is above the verification, which uh, I think, again, as the last point begs the question, is it time to start thinking about adding a fudge factor due to this unprecedented warm period, or maybe our unprecedentedly low forecasts?
Yeah. Yeah. I know I added a fudge factor. So, but it's, yeah, like we said earlier, I think it's, there's some data there. There's some data there. Yeah, well, I guess it's sort of to be continued, right?
Yeah,
See if we, because obviously there are some mixed signals here. There's no question about that. It's not like, you know, it's not like you look at these, the strip here, like I like to call it, like this is again the 15-day forecast you can look at from, thanks to Maxar, and you color coded by the anomaly type. You can see the next few days, there's definitely some cool weather. This is the EC ensemble we're looking at. Comparing it to the 10-year. You could also compare it to the 30-year up here. Um, and then it kind of where there's nothing, it's close to the 10-year normal, basically, that means. So, it's not like it's showing like a super killer hot forecast here. Obviously, the next 5 days is actually quite a bit below the 10-year, 40. You can see this 40.3 versus the 10-year is all the way on the right, 50. And then it does go back above 57 versus 54 and 60 versus 57. So a couple CDDs. So yeah, I think again, is this a little bit of a blip? In what otherwise will be a record or near record hot summer, or is this true variability that maybe is upon us, that will continue to the 16 to 20, which will give some of these cooler forecasts a little bit more potential to verify. We'll see.
yeah, and we'll have Dr. Lupo next week to hopefully shed some light on some of these things.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah, Dr. Lupo next week, and then uh and then hopefully again we'll have actually, if you talk to Dr. Lupo, you could just mention that we'll have the normals up on the site a couple days early, and I'll check when that is, but I think it's either I think it's on Thursday.
Yeah, I mentioned it. I'll mention it to him when I send him the reminder email. I'll probably do Thursday. Nobody ever reads their emails when I send them on Friday. Um, yeah, I'll mention
All right.
that. I did also mention it in the email I sent yesterday, I think. Yeah, pretty sure.
All
Um,
right.
but yeah, I'll mention it. I'll mention it again.
All right. Sounds good. Well, why don't we leave it there?
Yep.
Thank you for a good discussion. Just the two of us, but hey, I think we brought up some interesting stuff. Hopefully, anyone who watches this does too. So, all right. Well, thanks, Michael, and I guess we'll talk to you again next week.
Yep. Thanks. Have a good day.